Welcome, everyone. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you're located, to an event that I hope will be very exciting. I'm Rory SCHACTER. I'm a research fellow at Tokyo College at the University of Tokyo. I want to, first of all, before we begin, thank the many staff members and faculty of Tokyo College that have made this event possible, and also staff at the World Bank and Chia Networks. This has been hard to pull off, and we're really glad that we have. And I want to especially thank our two panelists for joining us today, Gemma Torras VIVES of the World Bank and Bram COHEN, CEO of Chia Networks. Just a little bit about Tokyo College, where I'm located at the University of Tokyo here. Our mission really is to bring together leading thinkers and leaders across disciplines, across the globe, from both inside and outside academia to address big, difficult questions that can't be properly understood, let alone solved, within more narrow or traditional parameters. And today we're going to be discussing two new and important and somewhat controversial approaches to solving difficult problems. The first is blockchain technology, and the second is carbon markets and how these two go together. And we're going to learn more about how they address climate change. Here, I'd like to return to my roots as a political philosophy scholar and quote Francis Bacon, the founder of modern science and technology, who famously remarked in his most important work that, quote, "If something has never yet been done, it would be absurd and self-contradictory to expect to achieve it other than through means that have never yet been tried." So today we're going to hear about some means that have never yet been tried or haven't been tried adequately to address climate change, which is a new problem. We're going to hear first from Gemma Torras VIVES. She is the IT officer of the World Bank's Climate Change Group. Prior to joining the World Bank, she worked at UNDP ECA office, at Microsoft Cities, UNESCO, UN Women, and she co-founded a blockchain-powered startup for displaced communities. She holds an MPA in economic development from Columbia University and a law degree from the University of Groningen. Next, we're going to hear from Bram COHEN. Mr. Cohen is the inventor of BitTorrent, the most used protocol for peer-to-peer file sharing over the internet. Bram is often accused of being Satoshi Nakamoto, the Bitcoin founder, a claim he denies. I'm not denying it because who really knows, but he denies it. Bram founded and was initial CEO of BitTorrent Inc. in 2004. He worked there in various modes and as a member of the board of directors. He left BitTorrent in August 2017 to found Chia Network. He served as chairman and CTO of the Chia Network since its founding and since June of 2019 as its CEO. Just a note on the format of the event, we're going to hear first from Gemma and then from Bram. And during their address, members in the audience can feel free to ask questions through Zoom's Q&A function. And I'm going to receive those questions, and we're going to do our best to select some of them, and I'm going to present them on the audience behalf. So please go ahead and post your questions as we go in English or Japanese. And a reminder also, we have interpretation into Japanese, and you can access that through Zoom as well. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Gemma, and she has a presentation for us. Thanks.
Thank you, Rory. Let me screen share one sec my presentation. So good morning and good evening and good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from Washington, D.C. In today's presentation, I will be providing an overview of the emerging challenges in the scale-up of the international carbon markets. I will also explain the offering of the World Bank Climate Warehouse Program and finalize with providing key highlights on the Climate Action Data Trust, which is one of the main focus of today's discussion. So starting with a little bit of context. So as many of you know, the Kyoto Protocol created a compliance market in 1997, which eventually never obtained a scale-up process. And then Paris Agreement since then has called an urgent action to keep warming to 1.5 Celsius. Without a functioning carbon market, we will be failing to achieve the Paris Agreement targets. And so what did the Paris Agreement set up? Basically, the Paris Agreement will be built through a bottom-up approach, as each party to the agreement can be providing the flexibility to choose how they want to achieve the climate goals. In this bottom-up nature of the Paris Agreement, it provides the flexibility and the choice to countries. It also increases the complexity and the diversity of reporting and verification mechanisms for greenhouse gas emissions inventories and mitigation outcomes. And this can lead to different governance rules, different technological systems, and eventually it can create more fragmentation in the market and also decreasing transparency and liquidity. On the right side of this slide, you see a caption that was mapped by the task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets. They map challenges across the supply chain, demand as well as market mechanisms, highlighting the challenges for the scale-up process. For instance, in the supply side, we see challenges in the carbon accounting, like double counting, double claim. In the market instruments and mechanisms, we see a lack of centralized, compliant, and voluntary databases. And on the demand side, we see unclear visibility of the project lifecycle and unclear link to the NDC. When we see all these challenges, this calls for two opportunities. The first one is to have a multi-stakeholder collaboration across actors, such as existing registries and methodologies, project developers and suppliers, buyers and capital providers, but also those that enable innovation, such as Web3 infrastructure players, blockchain entities, Web3 marketplace, and so on. The second opportunity offered in this Paris Agreement bottom-up nature is also digital infrastructure. So data and trade infrastructure will be a precondition to enable the realization of the potential of the carbon market through the different process from project investment, project development, certification and issuance, ongoing MRV, sale through exchange, and corporate purchase. So how can digital infrastructure alleviate these challenges? So we at the World Bank created the Climate Warehouse program, which basically aims to build a modular and an interoperable digital ecosystem for the carbon markets. It's through the Partnership for Market Implementation program under the innovation pillar. We do focus on digital ecosystem building for the carbon markets. In the slide, you can see a caption, a framework that we use in our work. So we start, for example, in the left side, emerging technologies such as sensors, meters, satellites can be leveraged in digital monitoring, reviewing, and verification systems to improve data collection and verification systems. And this can be connected to the national or global registries to automate the fulfillment of issuance and reporting requirements. Then national and global registries can be leveraged, can leverage tokenization mechanisms that secure the carbon credits into exchange tradable assets. And then the registry and the transaction data can be reflected in the climate action data trust that you see at the end of this chain, which aggregates this underlying information through a common data model. And this harmonized data can then be used by the private sector, where service providers can offer analytics, ratings, and forecasting. So this was a lot of information, but basically is the way to put together all this end-to-end digital ecosystem that can enable the carbon markets scale up. Just very briefly, the Climate Warehouse program has twofold offering. The first one is piloting and developing global public goods, which includes a number of work streams of this ecosystem. And secondly, support countries and jurisdictions to implement this digital infrastructure in the carbon markets. So let's focus on the Climate Action Data Trust today. As you can see in this slide, I'm giving you a quick update on the status of the different products that we are working on. Digital monitoring and reviewing verification systems, it's currently in pilot mode. We also have national carbon registries, tokenization instruments, and the Climate Action Data Trust. So today we're focusing on the last box that you see on the right. The Climate Action Data Trust is basically the global public metadata layer that we have built together with Chia Network to foster greater transparency, integrity, and security in the carbon markets. So what is the climate action data and where it sits in the ecosystem? Before I explain what is the Climate Action Data Trust, let me give you this overview of the ecosystem. So on the left side, we see the data sources, which came from companies, facilities, programs, and national statistics. On the right, on the middle, we see the market infrastructure that helps the aggregation and the accounting mechanism. So on the top, we see the independent standard registries, the country registries, and then below, we see the Climate Action Data Trust, which is a metadata repository for all these climate activities, authorizations, and transactions, which then is used for compliance reporting as one of the usage, and other kind of reportings fulfilling their obligations. So the Climate Action Data Trust is a blockchain-enabled platform that creates a peer-to-peer connection and communication across decentralized registries with the aim to aggregate and harmonize registry data across the world to ensure this transparent carbon accounting, enabling reporting compliance and identify potential risk of double counting. Since 2019, the World Bank has been prototyping and testing the platform with partnering governments and organizations to jointly learn about supporting technologies and integrating registry systems while co-creating the technical architecture, functionalities, and the data model for the platform. Across these three simulations, we have been developing and prototyping together with the Innovation Lab at the World Bank and the Climate Change Group, as well as testing with different blockchain technologies such as Ethereum, Hyperledger, blockchain as a software with Kaleido, and of course, Chia Network in this third and last simulation. Together, we conducted the third simulation from January till July 2022. And so the main participants, we took a phased approach from March until the end of July. We had 3 groups, and it included mainly national carbon registries, and then independent standard agencies and other broader participants in the market. And the process was basically to gather feedback on the technical architecture, on the data model, the installation, the user interface, and other areas that might be relevant for the future infrastructure. We tested with 30 participating organizations, 75 individual testers, 11 national governments, we across 58 testing sessions, and we gathered all this feedback and lessons learned that are captured in the final Climate Warehouse Simulation 3 report. You can check out details on how the World Bank together with Chia conducted this simulation and all the lessons learned that were collected. And then basically among these participants, I just wanted to give some examples. We had Japan as one of the key partners for testing and providing us feedback on the operational prototype. Chile, Singapore, Sweden, Switzerland, as well as Rwanda, Senegal, Peru, Uganda, and United Kingdom. And then we had the 5 independent standards, including BERA, Climate Action Reserve, American Carbon Registry, and Gold Standard, and Global Carbon Council. And then other observers such as UNFCCC, EBRD, and UNDP, providing actively feedback on the data model and taxonomy that will define the operational infrastructure. So what was the main insights in this simulation and testing activities? We definitely heard from participants that this kind of testing activities and simulations push them to envision an interconnected ecosystem beyond their own standalone system. And also it helped to anticipate what are the legacy changes that would be required to be connected to this infrastructure, and finally to validate the data granularity, the status information, and the units transfer methodology. Some benefits that participants mention is this platform can increase transparency in data sharing, address potentially double claim and double counting, identifying a common data model and building consensus around the data within the carbon markets. And then feedback also they also express the complexity of the upgrades that will be required to change to new infrastructure. And of course, this was very good feedback to keep noting and note in our report. And finally, we identified 3 main personas that would be using the platform and engaging with this platform: the policy setter, the registry administrator, and the IT support. So we tested with different personas, including the business and the technical side of these registries and standards. So just diving a little bit quickly on the technical side, and of course this will be covered more by Bram, but basically the infrastructure has 2 components. One is the data layer, which is basically defining a common data model and taxonomy, which I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes. and it reconciles data across registries, having one data model in one place and all the data harmonized and aggregated. The second layer is the blockchain, the public blockchain, which provides this immutability and transparency of data. It also gives us an audit function to trace back any changes, and it has a public and inclusive approach towards participants in a peer-to-peer network. So as I was mentioning, what is the data model of the Climate Action Data Trust? What you see in the screen is about 40 data fields that relate to project and carbon credits information. And we made this slide in track changes, so you could see what were the changes after we tested with more than 75 participants. We did change some values from required to optional because some data would not be available from certain stakeholders. We also, if you see the governance note, we added new pick list values to make sure that we were adding values for project type, methodologies, unit status, and project status. So these were changes, and the data model is publicly available at the Climate Warehouse website. Feel free to check it out since it's more granular for today's discussion. Then in terms of the blockchain layer, as I mentioned, the key characteristic is the accountability, giving the parties this decentralized governance where they can validate each other's data. And also it is aligned with the Article 6 bottom-up approach, giving countries the flexibility and the choice to actually track and record their emission reductions, transparency, integrity, and inclusiveness, since it's a public, fully open source and permissionless blockchain. This is a quick diagram on how it works. So basically, we see on the bottom the source registry, which has, it can be a country registry or an independent standard. It can upload the data manually through the user interface or import and export a file or through an API call. And then this data is synced into the blockchain where we have both the data layer and the blockchain layer syncing together, giving the Climate Action Data Trust platform. This is just a menu of the different testing areas. It's more technical, but just to give you an overview of what were the main areas that we tested and what were the profiles of testers, as well as the importance to test that specific area, like installation, user interface, API, and exporting and importing the Excel file. So finally, just to, what about, I covered the technical side. I covered also the process of testing and prototyping. But technology is not enough always, and we need to look at the governance and the business model of how this solution can be moved forward and can be implemented. So while we were testing the technical architecture, the government of Singapore, together with AIDA, the International Emission Trading Association, they convened a 6-month governance consultations to define how the Climate Action Data Trust should be governed and financed. They went through a number of deep dives and focus groups on governance and finance, more than 70 entities involved from all kinds of stakeholders. And basically, they developed a number of recommendations after 6 months of different focus groups and deep dives. And out of these recommendations, AIDA and the government of Singapore developed this governance system structure, which follows the inputs from these consultations. And the new Climate Action Data Trust, the operational phase, will be governed by an independent entity that will be anchored in Singapore. And basically, the council will be of 10 members from the national government registries and independent standards, leading the policy mandate and the strategy of this platform. Then they will have a secretariat that will be led by AIDA during an interim process. And finally, there will be 2 committees. The first one is the technical committee that will include the main technical leads of all carbon national registries and standards to keep developing the data model and the IT system. And on the second, we will have the user committee, which will be listening to the private sector inputs on how the platform should be evolving and what are the market demands in this space. This is the main structure of the governance system. And to give you some timing, basically, as I mentioned, we have been prototyping and testing this platform from the World Bank side since 2019. We finalized the last simulation at the end of August. And then we went through a transition process, transferring all the assets and this public good to a new entity governance system. And now there was a soft launch on the 26th of October. And on the 7th of December, next week, there will be the official launch in the Asia Climate Summit that will be happening in Singapore. And then following that official launch, there will be the first meetings of these governing bodies to have a call to integrate the national carbon registries and the independent standards to share their data. And so all the data will be shared, aggregated and harmonized in this platform. And hopefully with this data, the private sector, we can also unleash innovation from the private sector through which they can tap on this data and provide additional services that the carbon market need to keep growing. So this is the main plan, and happy to answer any questions after Bram's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gemma. That was great. If you're ready, Bram, I can turn it over to you.
Thanks. Here, let me share my screen. Okay, so Chia is a layer 1 blockchain. It is similar to Bitcoin. So, and it is a very good fit in both directions for carbon credits to be reported on and use Chia as a reporting and auditing system. And I'll be explaining why. So first off, there's a question of why you would want a blockchain in general for doing carbon credit reporting. And this is because you have many different countries who have quite a bit of carbon credits. They all own their own carbon credits, can do whatever they want with them, and they wish to coordinate with each other in a way where they're kind of auditing all of each other and they know where the sum totals of everything is going. And so you need a very secure distributed database that's very public for everybody to use. And blockchains are a good fit for that. They allow people to commit to what the state of everything is, of who owns what, in a way where they can't repudiate it later in the future, and where there's just a massive amount of security on this, where no one can retroactively change it. So the Chia is a very good fit here. First off, Chia is truly decentralized and extremely secure. It has that property in common with Bitcoin, but Chia also has the nice property that there's not a lot of power being burnt in the process of moving the consensus forward. So Bitcoin is very secure, but doing anything with it involves burning really unpleasant and gross amounts of power, which is directly counterproductive for anything green that you might want to do. Where Chia uses proofs of space and time instead of proof of work, does not have all of that electricity burning going on. On top of that, has a very simple, reliable, and auditable on-chain programming environment. And we at Chia Network Inc., who created the Chia blockchain, it doesn't need us to keep running, but we are building stuff on top of it and so that people can use it better. And we are building primitives directly for this, to directly enable this as well, providing support for it. It works in the opposite direction as well, that carbon credits are very good for us at Chia, that we have goals and values of a company that are very environmentally friendly. It's baked into the core of the technology that we have. And one of our core sets of technology is enabling truly decentralized finance. So we have this core pieces of tech which allow people to transact directly with each other with no trusted third party getting escrow of anything in the middle. That takes that there are kind of two central pieces of technology we have here. The first one is data layer. as was mentioned in the last presentation. And in that one, commerce is enabled on top of it because the data layer thing on chain is acting as an oracle. It is reporting the state of things. And one thing that we've built for that is making it so that someone can take funds that are on chain and lock them up to be claimable by someone else if a particular oracle reports a particular thing. So that it allows people to pay for something that's being reported by the oracle. I'm speaking a bit abstractly here, but it makes it so that the oracle that's being involved is kind of lightly trusted. It's acting as an oracle rather than as an escrow agent. And an escrow agent, escrow tends to be kind of expensive and potentially a little bit scary because you're really, really trusting the third party. Where if you're simply trusting them to report information, the level of trust needed is much, much less. And that it is much more expedient to do things that way. So that is a form of enabling commerce on top of whatever you're doing, which is not actually an immediate goal of what Climate Action Data Trust is doing right now, but they're getting it anyway. And so it's a good platform for technology. The other thing that we're doing is we have a token format. So things that are tokenized on chain can actually be traded directly on chain. So if you were doing this for carbon, which is not happening yet, I'm hoping it happens in the future, then what happens there is there are carbon credits that get tokenized that can then be traded on chain and just sent directly to other people. And when you actually want to use them, then you retire them and you get credit for them at the time of retirement. But these can then be traded between the time when they're issued on chain and they're retired. They can be traded as commodities and traded directly to other people. We have this core functionality in Chia that you can trade different types of tokens with other people. So so you can make what we call an offer file. So an example of this would be you want to trade a certain amount of carbon credits for a certain amount of the native Chia token. And so you make an offer file, which is a partial transaction. It does something that isn't valid. This thing now makes a certain amount of the carbon credits that you own kind of disappear, and a certain amount of native Chia just appear. And you can't do this. This is not a valid transaction because you're not allowed to just make Chia appear out of nowhere. That violates the rules. But having made this offer file, you can then send it to anyone, anywhere, over any really untrusted channel. And if someone wants to take the other side of this trade, they can. They can make something that makes a balancing amount of Chia disappear and just kind of prints a balancing amount of the carbon credits. And now these net out in both of them, and this is now putting them together, can be made into a valid transaction that will go through on the blockchain. So this is very powerful in terms of enabling commerce on top of things. And the whole point of tokenizing carbon credits is to enable very, very liquid markets. And doing it in this way makes it so there's not one single venue that's in charge of trading these, but like really any venue has direct access to being able to do this in a very liquid manner. So that's a very good thing. That's not the technology that's being deployed right now, but that's, hopefully in the future. The other reason why carbon credits work well for us is in terms of things you might want to tokenize, just speaking very pragmatically, there's a lot of regulations around the tokenization of equities. For pretty good reasons, you're not allowed to just randomly say, okay, I'm tokenizing this equity and people can trade it now, because that is rife with problems that have happened historically. But those rules don't apply to commodities. In particular, they don't apply to carbon credits because carbon credits tend to be owned by countries who can make up whatever rules they want, their countries. So just from a sheer practical expedience standpoint, it's very nice just being able to push something out. And so that's why we as a company are working on this, and why it's a very, very good fit.
Thanks very much, Bram. It was really good to hear from both of you, and I wanted to ask both of you two general questions and hopes and fears. Everyone would like to hear your hopes and fears related to the project, your personal hopes and fears. You can keep to yourself. So if I fall asleep for 10 years and I wake up and everything has gone as swimmingly, as positively as could possibly be hoped, with Chia helping World Bank and getting carbon markets on the blockchain, how does it look? What's going on? What am I fascinated or surprised or delighted to find? What's this event 10 years from now highlighting? And part two is, what are the big tail risks? What are the big things that could derail this, either at the level of Chia working with World Bank in terms of or just, if everything goes in some sense well on your end, that it doesn't get to where you're hoping. So either of you can go first. Hope, optimism, and then what are the big sticking points or challenges?
Well, when you're talking about like a time horizon of like 10 years, that's plenty of time to really get to a place where you have globally very, very liquid carbon markets in commoditized carbon tokens. There's a bunch of technical issues with carbon credits that there's a lot of different carbon credits. So a key part of making liquid markets in them is kind of smushing them into like groups together of reasonably comparable things. So there can be a single price across the whole asset, which enables liquid markets in it. This happens for all commodities. This is an issue that has to get done. But thinking of things happening very, very well, what I would really like to see is all carbon credits, like globally, like almost all of them, wind up inevitably landing on the Chia blockchain, and that's kind of the definitive place where they live, and commerce that's done in them, it all traces back to there. There's probably a lot of net settlement. There's some custodial things that are holding on to it for other people, things like that. But that is kind of the definitive thing, the equivalent of like, the Fed wire in the United States says where all the money is. This is kind of saying where all the carbon credits are in this like very large liquid market that's has very good, efficient pricing that's enabling a lot of commerce happening across these things. And the whole point of having carbon credits instead of just putting lots of carbon taxes all over the place is so that you can well, first off, give credit to sequestration that happens, but also to make it possible to find real prices on things, to really know how much does this cost really. And so that's kind of the good scenario of things happening. I think that the biggest risks have to do with the network effects here, that this whole process of getting enough carbon credits together and enough of them, grouped appropriately into things that are comparable with each other. That's a whole process that we're working through right now. And sometimes you have to get everyone to play ball and be happy with the other credits that they're getting, or happy enough with the other credits that they're being, lumped in with. So you have to do a good job of putting together things that are actually comparable. So that's, and this involves many, many different parties. There are many different countries in the world which have their own carbon credits, and they all kind of have to play ball for this to really work, or most of them at least have to play ball for this to work well. So I think that's the biggest risk, is just the sheer coordination issue across many, many different entities to get to unlock the true value potential of this.
Thanks. Gemma, your hopes and fears?
Sure. So on the hope, again, mentioning it before, the carbon markets have a strong potential to help mobilize resources and reduce the cost, to give countries and companies also to space to smooth the low carbon transition. So it is estimated that trading in carbon credits could reduce the cost of implementing nationally determined contributions by more than a half, by as much as 250 million by 2030. So in this regard, carbon markets have a strong potential to help countries advance and combat the climate change problem. It's not a silver bullet, but it's an important tool to also channel private sector capital to finance low carbon development and infrastructure. And one of the key tools to help the carbon markets realize this potential is data and trade infrastructure. As I mentioned before, to me, if I look from 5 to 10 years now, having a digitized end-to-end ecosystem of different infrastructure pieces that connect together and allow countries to go through the different life cycles of projects and being able to implement and report back their emission reduction. So starting from digital MRVs, connecting to national carbon registries, which then this data can be aggregated and harmonized in the Climate Action Data Trust. And then, of course, you have tokenization mechanisms that can help make carbon credits more tradable and fungible to be exchanged. So to enable this acceleration of infrastructure will be key. In terms of challenges, one of the key challenges that we see is the constraints of capacity that countries have to be able to implement this infrastructure, as well as other areas within the carbon markets. And that's why at the World Bank, we have a program and among many others called Partnership for Market Implementation, that we work closely with countries to give them capacity building programs in terms of creating carbon incentive instruments, as well as infrastructure to be able to achieve these goals. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much. So I want to now just ask each of you a couple more targeted questions. Bram, I want to start with you. And I have no dog in the fight here. I'm not a Ethereum guy or a Bitcoin guy. I just, academics, I didn't get in early enough. But the one elephant in the room here, one issue is, a really compelling part of Chia's claim is on the environmental impact, that it's cleaner, and that proof of work or Bitcoin is very energy intensive. And I want to just push back a little bit about that. And I'm sure I'm sure you have friends and maybe former colleagues who have different views. And so the other side of it, Bitcoin, a couple points could be, first of all, yes, it's very energy intensive, but it's not, in the grand scheme of energy consumption, it's not huge. But maybe another, and so maybe that's not an absolute problem for Bitcoin. And also, it could also maybe be argued that proof of work, that the point is actually that it is expensive because you're harnessing or sort of capturing energy, and later you can sell it back. And so my question is sort of, does Chia see itself as providing a cleaner alternative that the World Bank or carbon markets could work with, but Bitcoin can continue on in its path, or is there a deeper challenge there? I mean, I raise that because, I mean, frankly, blockchain or crypto, however you want to put it, has a big image problem, and it didn't get any better with the FTX collapse. And so, Chia, I'm very impressed, but I just want to, how would the other side or other sides respond to you? What do you make of this kind of debate?
Well, a few things there. Bitcoin's first off, Bitcoin's power usage actually is fairly significant, even on a global scale. It's comparable to some countries, and then also speaking in marginal terms, that things that are done on Bitcoin that increase its value, that are increasing its usage, those in turn provide greater mining rewards and very directly contribute to the energy consumption of the whole entire thing in meaningful ways, in terms of the marginal amount that's happening. I thought you were actually going to push back in the opposite direction and point out that Ethereum has switched to proof of stake, which doesn't involve burning very much power. The thing is, Bitcoin is kind of unique in the sheer scale of power that it burns. Everything else is just not. It is really qualitatively different in terms of what it's doing on the power side. So people start debating about how much power goes into Visa and how much power goes into Ethereum and how much power goes into Chia, things like that. It's all kind of a silly discussion at that point because none of these things have anything even vaguely like what's going on in Bitcoin. Although Chia's power consumption is quite low given the sheer scale of, we have over 100,000 full nodes running out there. And that's a lot of the power that's going in is just running those nodes, although they are fairly lightweight, but that's a lot of servers or a lot of services. They're running on a lot of desktops out there. But you're also obviously getting a lot of security and value for all of that there. Right. There's this kind of just very dark thing that just happened in the world of crypto, which was really, in some ways, a validation of the fundamental thesis to it, that the thing that failed was someone who's just an outright con artist was running an exchange and just stole everybody's money. And this really speaks to the importance of having truly decentralized finance, like I was talking about, that you don't take your money and send it to someone who's just escrowing everything and you're just trusting them that they have your money and things are being traded as your orders say, and that you should do really as much as possible your own custody and have a very auditable system. And so for the most part, the cryptocurrencies that were being traded there, a bunch of them have gone down in value because of this just sort of cloud that's gone over everything, but they have not been compromised by this. The cryptocurrencies themselves continue to run just fine because well, it varies between the different ones. Some of them are kind of sketch, but for the most part, especially Chia, actually Chia wasn't even listed on them at all. But the cryptocurrencies are basically continue to run. So the particular users whose funds had been sent to those organizations have been just outright stolen from. But that's not any failure of technology. That was a con artist just stealing the money that people had entrusted him with.
All right, thanks very much. I have a question for Gemma, but Bram can come in on this too. And that's, blockchain is often accused by critics of being a solution in search of a problem. And I think the presentations you gave really seem to indicate that, there is this obvious problem with climate change, and then with carbon markets it's addressing. So my question is is blockchain basically needed to solve the carbon market problems? Is it really a requirement? Were you not able to do it with non-blockchain technology? Or is it somewhere in between, that this is going to help a lot, but it's not, or maybe tremendously, but it's not truly an either-or question? Do you want to?
Are you asking me or Bram? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
So my first reaction to your question is it depends on the use case, right? It's a case-by-case basis, and of course, technology, in this case, blockchain, is not the silver bullet, and it has to be complemented with the governance, the business model, the stakeholders, the community, and the policy context. So let me maybe deep dive into how blockchain was explored and selected as one of the technologies to be building this infrastructure for the carbon market. So in 2018, the World Bank published a report. It's available online, Blockchain and Emerging Digital Technologies for Enhancing Post-2020 Climate Markets. And there we explored different emerging technologies and their potential in helping out the scale-up process of the markets. And we had a number of different metric principles. For instance, market integrity. So is the capital efficiently allocated? Secondly, environmental integrity. Do we have like transparency and a compatibility of value of mitigation outcomes? Another one is the transparency that we have mentioned today a lot. Is there a free exchange of information? And then inclusiveness. Does this technology facilitate and encourage more jurisdictions and greater international cooperation? And finally, cost effectiveness. So can we reduce the transaction cost through this technology? And so while looking at these metric principles, we saw blockchain as blockchain-enabled distributed ledgers as a technology that through its smart contracts, it can provide transparency and a robust rule implementation process that can address all this wide range of regulations, standards that are required by investors and regulators and all these carbon market stakeholders. And so blockchain serves as both a very a tool for accountability and transactional efficiency that is required in this complex and fragmented market that needs to be scaling up and more harmonized across the stakeholders and so on. So basically, if we focus more, the main key takeaways in that report, and you can check it out, was that the technology can help us synthesize and support the transaction of all types of emission-related data. It can also accommodate data that is captured automatically or manually to support an integrated network. And finally, it provides, as Bram mentioned, the mechanism to reach consensus without a single entity dominating the network for participants in the ledger. So that was the main key takeaways. But always these technology solutions need to go together with the right stakeholder collaboration and an applicable policy context. And as you said, not a solution searching for a problem, but the opposite, a design that is centered to the user and to the policy context. Yeah.
Bram, did you want to come in on that at all? If blockchain technology didn't exist, would carbon markets be a hopeless or a highly unlikely thing? Or
well, we have markets, but it would, without blockchain, you wind up having to have some entity who's entrusted with it, and usually what winds up happening in practice is that entity acts as a gatekeeper and takes kind of a cut of every trade that happens and really limits puts a damper on the whole thing and potentially limits the scale and scope of the market.
All right. So I have one more question myself, and then we'll start to use the audience questions. I want to make sure I pose this in a fair, in a reasonable way. Now, carbon markets themselves are very complex and controversial, and there are efficiency issues, and there are issues that economists debate. Are they gonna work out? Are they liquid enough? I have a bit of a different question for both of you, which is both of you have been involved for a long time in blockchain and decentralized ledger technology, and going along with that, obviously, are some general hopes you have for this technology to help humankind. And sometimes this technology is associated with libertarian or outlook or freedom or democratization, various positive words. One thing I kind of noticed in listening, especially to your presentation, Gemma, is that you have decentralized blockchain aiding in these carbon markets, but the carbon markets themselves, in a sense, are being created by top-down regulation from nation states. And so I wonder, is there a bit of friction or a tension there between some of the more general optimistic hopes for blockchain and the reality in this case, in which ultimately, in some sense, maybe a critic could say, look, this is a super great enforcement mechanism for government regulation. Central governments or the EU is going to just decide to price carbon such certain way, and they're going to be able to get that price through the blockchain. So I'm just wondering, is this sort of, are you layering over decentralization over a centralized nation state or EU control? Is there any issue there? And sorry if that was a bit vague the way I worded it.
So thank you for the question. Actually, we're in a moment where both approaches are aligned, because after the Kyoto Protocol, which was a top-down approach, in the Paris Agreement, specifically in Article 6.2, it provides what it says in the article, no? A decentralized approach, where countries can offer, have the flexibility and the choice to take the decentralized approach that they wish, to be able to report and reduce their emissions and report it back. And so, well, this approach opens for innovation and national adaptation of carbon market instruments. And since there's no specific centralized approach, countries are now taking different ways of cooperating to achieve these goals. And then the Climate Action Data Trust is exactly offering this data infrastructure as one innovative product that countries can take to implement this decentralized approach offered by the Paris Agreement under Article 6.2. So in this case, it's fully aligned, where Paris Agreement Article 6 is giving back to the countries the accountability and the flexibility to achieve these goals. And the way they can do it is to use infrastructure available in the market, such as the Climate Action Data Trust, that has a decentralized governance system through which there's a peer-to-peer network validation, and each country can validate each other's data and connect directly without a top-down approach as we saw in the past. So I hope this answers the question.
Thanks. Bram, did you have any?
There are a few things. There are a few different reasons why people have poor opinions of carbon credits. There's one group who just don't like markets, and I don't particularly feel the need to rebut that. But there's slightly more legitimately, there's different levels of quality of carbon credit. And there are definitely some of them that get extremely dubious. There are things where someone's like, well, I could have done some horrible polluting, but I didn't, so you should pay me for that, which that doesn't sound great. Because of that, it's very, very important to not have all carbon credits painted by the same brush. You know, the carbon credits we're talking about here are very, very high quality ones of like natural sequestration and things like that. And it's very important in the process of making liquid markets that you don't, even the very low quality carbon credits can be there, but they need to be appropriately labeled and priced accordingly.
Okay. So let me move on. I have some questions from the audience, and maybe I'll come back in myself later. But so I'm just going to try and read these out. So we have one from an attendee. This I think is more directed towards you, Bram. Why is, and you started to get into this a bit, but you know, it's clear the differentiation between Chia and Bitcoin in terms of energy use. But the question is, how does Chia differentiate itself from Ethereum or other proof of stake consensus algorithms? You know, what's its key differentiator? And I guess I'm going to add on here a little bit myself. You know, Ethereum and others, they're claiming they're going to get better and better and so on. So how do you relate to that side of it?
Yeah, so the two things. First of all, in terms of just security and reliability, Ethereum, you know, they just completely changed how the whole thing worked. Just they could, right? So clearly there's a lot of centralized control right there at the definitional level, regardless of operational things. Then actually, there's a lot of things that are going on right now that are actually super sketchy in the world of Ethereum, that there's basically, especially when you're trying to make liquid markets, there are things where the process of front-running trades is basically getting baked into Ethereum at the consensus layer. That's called the MEV industry, which is really the pocketing the spread industry. And it like people talk openly about things that would be considered really criminal activity on Wall Street. And this is viewed as a good thing in the world of Ethereum. And it's super sketchy and scary. So we're not doing that. We're taking the opposite tack of no. You never have perfectly efficient markets. There's no such thing. There is value in price discovery and providing of liquidity, and people do make returns on trading and posting money. However, you try to make this as efficient as possible and getting more efficient over time. And in Ethereum, because it's proof of stake, actually, these things have the potential to destabilize the entire system. And most of the measures they're taking are not, their concept of fair is not to take less money from retail users, it's to spread the loot evenly among everyone who's participating in the process. So that's really not comparable there. We also have some just purely technical benefits, like in Chia, everything that happens in a block happens simultaneously. So like when you try to do transaction ordering in Ethereum, you can do an arbitrary transaction order that you want. In Chia, you have much less control over this. Each individual transaction can be included or not, but they all happen simultaneously. So if something is like announcing a price, the price it announces can be high or low, but not both simultaneously. And this naturally in and of itself goes a long way to reduce the potential of just taking money that can be made by whoever it is that's making blocks.
All right, thanks very much. I have a question, I think more directed towards Gemma, and let me see if you understand it. I want to make sure. The audience member asked, could you please tell us more about the similarities and differences with the former Kyoto Protocol CDM, Clean Development Mechanism? Is that, Gemma, does that ring the right bells for you? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, that's a good question. Basically, at the Kyoto, it was a top-down approach where we have a central entity that would be managing the data and the reporting mechanisms. And right now, since this system didn't scale up and had some limitations, the Paris Agreement provided for Article 6.2 to have, instead of a top-down approach, a decentralized way where countries can have bilateral agreements and bilateral cooperation, or even multilateral, to be able to adopt certain infrastructure and use other innovative mechanisms in the markets to achieve these climate goals. And while this flexibility and choice is positive to give a wide range of instruments to use, and also it gives back the countries the accountability, it also creates some fragmentation in the market, and it can lead to more heterogeneous kind of segments of the market, and that's why we have seen some increased fragmentation, because right now we have different reporting and verification mechanisms in place. So we have different ways the countries have different data formats and data models and different ways to verify and report these reductions of emissions. And so that's why through this Paris Agreement bottom-up nature, it has been highly recommended by the task force on the scaling voluntary carbon markets to build more data and trade infrastructure to be able to address these collateral effects that we see in having more heterogeneous markets and fragmentation and complexity. So I hope this answers the question.
Thanks very much. So I have a couple questions on the carbon credits as how they're going to be used. And I want to just preface them by saying that I mentioned this to Gemma earlier, that I checked, and the compliant carbon credit market, it looks like its size now is in the approaching $300 billion. It's around the same as the Bitcoin market cap, actually, interestingly enough. So I mentioned that, and I also want to mention that the carbon market futures market in 2021, it's since crashed back down, was up 350%. So it was, aside from Bitcoin, it was actually, and Ethereum was actually the highest performing commodity or future. So obviously there's certain kind of money in this on the side. So I have a question from Roman Zavidich. He wants to know, do you think the implementation, and this is for you, Bram, do you think the implementation of carbon credits with the help of Chia is going to make this asset available for trading as a speculative asset? And then he had a follow-up. which is what is more general for Chia. What's the next step after carbon tokenization? What's the next sphere that Chia would be interested in looking towards to tokenize?
Well, as far as tokenization goes, I mean, we'd really like to tokenize all the things. You know, it would be ideal to do equities and other things like that. But right now, we're very much focused on carbon as our beachhead here. Sorry, what was the first part of the question again?
He asked, is it going to be available? Is Chia going to make carbon credit, or is Chia going to make carbon credits available for trading as a speculative asset?
Oh, yeah. So it's a little complicated. So when you the current things going on do make it so that you, like I was saying, do allow for commerce on chain of what's happening. That's in what's being reported. It's not nearly as easy as it would be if it was actually direct tokenization via the Chia asset token, the CAT standard on chain. I'm hoping that happens in the future, because that would make it very, very easy for really anyone to buy, any amount of those tokens as a potential speculative thing for them to do as a hedge or just an investment that they wanted to make.
Just a quick.
Oh, and in terms of, we're also doing other things. Like Chia is a general purpose cryptocurrency. You could do lots of things. I personally right now am working on making it so people can play poker like peer-to-peer directly against each other with no casino in the middle.
Very interesting. We have some more questions. This one, I guess, a bit more directed towards Gemma, from Dusty Aluk. My apologies if I get anyone's names wrong here. How are the users of Climate Action Data Trust going to be able to obtain Chia coins to create market purchases for carbon credits? With a variety of organizations and countries, does this create a barrier for program utilization? I guess that's for both of you.
So, go ahead, Bram.
Sorry.
No, you can go. I think that this Gemma can speak more to
this. No, definitely. I think it's a very excellent question. And I believe that this is being decided as we speak, but I can talk about how we managed during the testing and the simulation, and then I will pass it to Bram for his vision on how this can be achieved. So during the testing and the simulation activities, we wanted to test in the mainnet, because we didn't want to go through first the testnet and then we wouldn't know exactly troubleshooting whether one would be causing for the testnet or it would be related to another reason. So we wanted to make it as real and pragmatic as possible. So while testing in the mainnet, as you may imagine, the testers, the users needed Chia coins to upload dummy data in the system. And so just to avoid any bottleneck and to ensure more smooth testing, since, as you know, there are some challenges in having like a tight timeline with many stakeholders. Chia was directly providing Chia coins in the wallet. Once the user would install the Chia wallet and the data layer of the Climate Action Data Trust in their own computer or in a cloud hosted instance, they would be receiving a number of Chia coins. And then with these Chia coins, they would be able to go through a number of test scripts and a user journey through which they would be testing, uploading data on the projects, the carbon credits, retiring the unit, checking the functionality of auditing, and so on. In terms of how this will happen after the testing. So once this platform is launched next week and we start this operational phase where countries will be able to share data and integrate, this is something that needs to be, the final decision is of the new governance system of this new independent entity that is anchored in Singapore. And the governance system is composed of the main registry leads that will be leading the mandate of this platform. And of course, Chia will be helping in this scale-up process and leveraging the data layer, and will be run on Chia blockchain. And then it will be a decision to see how these Chia coins can be transferred to the participants. But Bram, over to you on this, on potential possibilities.
Yeah, there's really two different things going on here. There's one component of the things are how do you get Chia just for paying transaction fees, just to make things happen on chain, and the currently transaction fees are extremely low, and the amount of transactions necessary for doing this kind of reporting isn't very high. So this is really not much of a problem right now. But to get to kind of my vision of making it so there's a lot of commerce happening on chain, you need to have some way of bringing value onto the system. There needs to be some kind of onboarding. So there's a few different ways of doing this. We're listed on, Chia's listed on some exchanges where you can buy stuff, although not the very biggest ones, unfortunately. Although it's kind of nice that it wasn't on the one that just stole everyone's money. So that was good. But being on as exchanges is one way of doing that. There's also a stable coin called Stably, which does issue on Chia. So that's one way of getting a value onto it. Another thing is we are in the process of building a bridge from Ethereum to Chia as a way of getting that value over to allow you to start transacting there. So you could like buy Chia with your wrapped Ethereum and then buy carbon credits with your Chia or something along those lines. Bridges have a checkered history, so we are being very, very careful about how we go about implementing that. But definitely making it easier to onboard monetary value into the system is something we're very much working on right now.
Okay, and thanks. And there's a follow-up question from the audience member, actually. So you've sort of touched on it. So they're wondering, how far out are we from seeing carbon credits hit the market? So, are these credits going to be available for the public as well? I mean, did I understand you to say they would be then, or?
Yeah, well, when you have liquid markets, they're very available to everyone. Certainly when you get to the point of it being tokenized on chain, that's when it's extremely liquid, and really even very tiny denominations can be very easy to get your hands on. At the start, what's being built right now is a little bit more of kind of a reporting tool. So people are kind of laying claim to things by purchasing them kind of in the background, and this is being reported on chain, and it's kind of this auditing system of making sure that the totals add up, which is being done in a way that's very transparent. So that but hopefully in the future, it grows into much, much more than that.
All right, great. We have a question on carbon credit quality. So an audience member wonders, the work of assessing and scrutinizing carbon credits is obviously very difficult. How do you go about evaluating and categorizing these credits in terms of their quality? Is maybe Gemma, or either, go ahead.
Yeah, well, the basic categorizations are there's kind of two basic parameters, which result in 4 categories. So any given carbon credit can either be natural or synthetic, and it can be an offset or or sequestration. So an offset is something could have happened that would have caused carbon dioxide release, and you prevented it. And sequestration is you actually in some way took carbon dioxide out of the air and just sucked it down and made it go somewhere other than the atmosphere, like undid the process of pollution. And then these are things that either happen naturally, like in the form of there just being trees in a country, which is why countries have a lot of high quality carbon credits, or something that we humans did. So generally speaking, the sequestration is higher quality than offsets, and even within offsets, like natural offsets are higher quality than synthetic offsets. And that, although actually for sequestration, a funny thing is that the synthetic sequestration actually costs more currently, although that's not a very liquid market than the natural sequestration. And a lot of those just there are very few of those credits available. So I've actually run into more than one entrepreneur at founder events whose model is they're doing carbon sequestration, like human carbon sequestration, and really the only way they have a business model is if there are real markets in this, so they can get the appropriate carbon credits for that and then be able to sell those in a way that actually makes them money, because it's actually pretty hard to pull carbon out of the air. It's like very convenient to put it up there, is why we do it so much. And undoing that process is pretty expensive.
Thanks. Gemma, did you want to add anything about this evaluating carbon quality?
Sure. So I guess when we look at the quality of carbon credits, we look at two layers when looking at the quality. The first one is the traditional or the common criteria that is used in the market. So we have like a number of different criteria. For instance, when we talk about the high quality carbon credit, is because it accurately or conservatively represents greenhouse emissions reductions or removals that are achieved through the voluntary carbon market. And then we can see like some of the criteria are what we call calculations of baseline, additionality, leakage, and permanence. So for example, when we quantify the emission reductions and removals, it refers to the methodologies that we use to which GHG emissions are measured, including methods or collecting, analyzing, and storing emissions data. Another criteria is credible baselines to determine that these emissions that would have been emitted to on and or removed from the atmosphere had the voluntary carbon market project or program not been implemented. Another criteria that we also look at is the additionality. So basically, this means that the greenhouse gas emission reductions and removals are associated with a carbon credit that would have not taken place without the incentives or the resources provided by a project. So these are some of the criteria that is being used. Another one is their contribution to sustainable development goals. So broader socioeconomic and community outcomes such as gender, air quality, and others. So we would look at these two different layers.
All right, thanks very much. So the final questions for me is just for both of you. Some of the people watching this event right now are interested in in these subjects, but are new to it. Do you each have a suggestion or two if you're really very interested in climate change, but you really just don't know much about blockchain yet, or you're very interested in blockchain, but carbon markets, you just don't. What are they? Where might people want to look if you were going to direct them? What are one or two places? Could be your own websites, but any thoughts on that?
Well, for the Chia stuff, there's docs.chia.net has a lot of extremely technical documentation. The things of particular interest related to carbon is the things called a data layer, and also the Chia asset token standard. Okay, great. Gemma, any
Yeah, sure. So the first one that would come into my mind is the if you Google online learning campus of the World Bank, we do have a dedicated page called Climate Warehouse, which is the program that I explained before that aims to set up the infrastructure to scale up the compliance carbon market together with the voluntary carbon market. And we have a number of presentations, webinars, and technical papers that are bridging together emerging technologies with carbon markets. And of course, one of the focus is blockchain technology. So if you want to check it out, I think it's useful. And I'm sure other sources are full of this information as well.
All right, well, thanks very much. Our time has come to a close. I want to thank both of our participants again for joining us and for everyone who made this event possible. And I just want to conclude myself by saying, there's a lot of negative news out there in the world about economics, about climate change, about blockchain and cryptocurrency. But sitting here today and listening to you, I think there's a lot of optimistic and practical and pragmatic progress also being made on other fronts. And this is, I think we should remember that, and technology is marching forward. And so that's great. Anyway, again, I think this is really interesting. Thanks for all the audience questions, and Thanks to everyone. Have a good evening or the good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.